mengumumkan keberangkatan tiba Duli Yang Teramat Mulia Raja Dr. Nazrin Shah Ibni Sultan Azlan Muhyiddin Shah, announcing the arrival of His Royal Highness Raja Dr. Nazrin Shah, the Crown Prince of Perak. Ampun Tuanku, menjunjung kasih di atas keberangkatan Tuanku ke majlis pada petang ini. Patik mohon untuk meneruskan acara. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Dr. Zamri Abdul Kadir, the Chief Minister of Perak, Datuk Seri Anifah Aman, the Foreign Minister of Malaysia, yang dimuliakan kaum kerabat Diraja Perak, the Honourable Martina Telagawa, the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, Dr. Haji Muhammad Yusof Kala, former Vice President of Indonesia, Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid, the Chairman of Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad, Mr. Khalid Awang, Conference Director and the President of IIUM Alumni. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the International Conference of Global Movement of Moderates. And as for the session today, at the moment it will be the special royal address by none other than His Royal Highness Raja Dr. Nazrin Shah, the Crown Prince of Perak. First and foremost, let us all give a very warm welcome to His Royal Highness Dr. Raja Nazrin Shah. And to steer the discussion, the moderator will be Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid. Allow me to give a little bit of background. Dr. Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid is one of the handful prominent Malaysians. His involvement in corporate Malaysia has been extensive since his joining of NSTP in 1979, and Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid is currently the Chairman of Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad. Without further ado, I'll hand over the session to Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and a very good afternoon, distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to moderate this session, special royal address by Yang Teramat Mulia Raja Nazrin Shah bin Ibni Sultan Azlan Muhyiddin Shah. Let me just say a few words first about this inaugural effort to try and drive this movement of moderates. I hope it will continue, and I hope it will actually be sort of pursued with a ferocity not normally associated with moderates. But for the purpose of this afternoon's special royal address, what the topic is going to be is with regard to dialogue, an inter-civilizational dialogue, a hope for the future. And His Royal Highness is eminently suited to be discussing this and addressing it to you. You do know, I imagine, from the program notes about the background and accomplishments of His Royal Highness, who is the Crown Prince of Perak. He obtained his degrees from Oxford and Harvard, where he got a PhD from Harvard. And he is actually, if you wanted to use the expression philosopher king, it applies to him more suitably than to anyone that I know. And in terms of the relevance of his activities to today's royal address, I would like to draw your attention especially to the fact that His Royal Highness is Malaysia's special envoy for interfaith and inter-civilizational dialogue, and he has led the Malaysian delegation to the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations Forums in Doha in December last year and in Rio de Janeiro in May 2010. So quite apart from an intellectual and academic qualification, he also has played a diplomatic and practical role in respect of inter-civilizational dialogue. So I can't think of a better person to give this address, royal or common. And it is therefore my great pleasure to introduce and invite, an honor for me to invite Duli Yang Teramat Mulia, Raja Nazrin Shah Ibni Sultan Azlan Muhyiddin Shah, the Crown Prince of Perak, to give us the royal address. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a privilege and an honor for me to be standing before you today to address a topic that is at the top of the agenda of many international forums and that has inspired several important regional and global initiatives. It might be useful to begin with refreshing ourselves on the origin and context of the current discourse on a dialogue among civilizations. I believe context is vital to an understanding of the rationale for the discourse and its implications. I then hope to share with you some thoughts on the prospects and possibilities for inter-civilizational dialogues in the future and how the global community can better advance its goals. As is well known, dialogue across nations, cultures, and faiths is not a new exhortation. Expressed variously, it has been wise counsel from ancient times to the present. One of the most profound exhortations is from the Holy Quran. O mankind, we created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes that you may know each other. The current discourse on inter-civilizational dialogue, however, goes beyond cultures and civilizations just knowing and understanding each other. The current discourse is about societies and countries from diverse cultural backgrounds engaging with each other to resolve issues, avert conflict, and promote peace. The call for inter-civilizational dialogue is now driven not so much by the desire to know and understand each other, although that is very important, but rather by the felt imperative to prevent and manage what has been called a looming clash of civilizations. Dialogue, it is held, can ward off a clash. The clash of civilizations proposition can be traced to Bernard Lewis's assertion in 1990 that the clash of civilizations between the Western Judeo-Christian heritage and its ancient rival Islam was imminent. This refrain was picked up by Samuel Huntington, who developed his hypothesis of a clash of civilizations over several years in the period 1992 to 1996. This hypothesis asserted that with the end of the Cold War, the great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. Nation states will remain the most powerful actors in world affairs, but the principal conflicts of global politics will occur between nations and groups of different civilizations. The clash of civilizations will dominate global politics, and the fault lines between civilizations will be the battle lines of the future. In this view, the clash most likely and imminent, and the one for which the West must prepare for, is the clash between the Western and Islamic civilizations. No other civilization poses as significant a challenge to Western civilization as does the Islamic civilization. The hypothesis also pointed to the bloody borders that Islamic civilization allegedly has with non-Islamic civilizations. It ends with several ideas on how the West can defend its interests and maintain its supremacy amidst the unfolding scenario. In the long term, civilizations will have to learn to coexist with one another. But in the short term, Western solidarity should be further consolidated and expanded to include other cultures akin to Western culture in Eastern Europe and Latin America. The growing military strength of Islamic and Confucian states must be curbed and differences between them exploited. And Western military superiority should be sustained in East and Southwest Asia. The hypothesis was refined in subsequent years and attracted much controversy as well, including in the United States. But it went viral after 9/11. Some saw justification of the hypothesis in that event, as well as in the others that followed. The so-called war on terror, the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, continuing sporadic terrorist attacks against Western targets, and growing sentiment against each other in the Muslim world as well as in the West seem to portend a real clash of civilizations. This is the context for the present genre of inter-civilizational dialogues that have emerged. The reaction against the narrative of the clash of civilizations hypothesis and the deterioration in West-Muslim world relations generated a strong desire among concerned individuals and groups to counter and arrest the trend. The Barcelona process was launched in 1995. The Alliance of Civilizations was launched by the United Nations in 2005, following the joint initiative of the Prime Ministers of Spain and Turkey. These were among the more prominent of many initiatives and forums that emerged propagating inter-civilizational dialogue. The impetus for such dialogues continues to be renewed and strengthened with each negative development, especially in the West-Muslim world relations. While their central purpose is the moderating of conflictual divides to promote peace and harmony, their themes and strategies vary. The launching of the Global Movement of Moderates Foundation by Prime Minister Najib yesterday is another important initiative in galvanizing and uniting moderates' voices of peace among people of all cultures and beliefs. The question arises, do inter-civilizational dialogues hold hope for the future? How much promise do they possess? Can these forums yield in any meaningful way greater harmony between peoples and nations of diverse cultures and faiths? Or will they go down in history as the heroic, well-intentioned efforts of good men and women that succumb, like so many such efforts do, to the very forces they seek to tame and contain? These are difficult questions. Only time will tell. But we can ponder and hopefully arrive at a reasonable and sober assessment of the prospects. It is worthwhile to briefly survey the challenges that the current strategic environment poses to dialogues of this nature, especially as they apply to the nexus between the West and the Muslim world. The Huntingtonian vision of a clash of civilizations, whose result can only be a veritable Armageddon that ends in tragedy for all, has thankfully not materialized. In my view, it most likely will not. There are too many positive, countervailing forces at work that will prevent this, at least in our times. But the situation that is unfolding before us is cause enough for grave concern. The strategic environment post-September 11 has seen a widening of the fault lines between the West and the Muslim world, even as government-to-government relations and cooperation remain generally healthy. Terrorist acts against Western targets in Indonesia, West Asia, North Africa, and Europe, the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, Muslim immigration into Europe, incidents such as the cartooning of the Prophet Muhammad in Europe, and threats to burn the Holy Quran in the United States, and the friction in the relations between the United States and Pakistan have stoked anti-Muslim sentiment in the West and anti-West sentiment in the Muslim world. Western involvement in the violent political change that took place in Libya, in the current political unrest in West Asia and North Africa, has been welcomed by some Arab states and dissident as well as mainstream groups. However, it has evoked strong resentment and anti-West sentiment in other Muslim quarters. US-Iran tensions continue to impact on the Muslim-West divide, although some Arab governments are aligned with the West over this issue. The Palestinian question remains the single most emotive and long-standing political issue uniting the Muslim world against the West, in particular the United States and Israel. On Huntington's Confucian front, efforts are underway to balance China's growing strategic and military capabilities, although Western and allied power is already substantially greater than China's. As China's economy continues to develop and it resumes its position as the world's #1 economy, apprehensions will continue to grow among the existing dominant powers and some neighbors. The situation warrants close watch, as action and reaction can provide a security dilemma for all sides that is sure to lead to a worsening security environment. There is another critical dimension of the global strategic environment to which Huntington refers to only briefly, given his emphasis on the clashes between civilizations. This is the tension and conflict between countries and peoples of the same cultural and religious background, and the conflicts within countries. The West is relatively secure and stable in this regard. Violent domestic conflicts have been largely resolved as nation states and democracies matured over a couple of 100 years. They are largely at peace with themselves now. But in many of the relatively recently independent developing nation states, nation building and even state building are still work in progress. Political injustices, poor governance, severe socio-economic disparities, and ethnic, sectarian, and tribal cleavages converge to render them fragile and conflict-prone. The Arab Crescent is going through a period of internal political unrest. Sometimes, strong government is the only glue that holds societies together. And when that glue is removed, turmoil is the sad consequence. However, initial turbulence and unrest is a frequent feature of democratic political change everywhere. A period of continued instability, unrest, and human casualties appear to be the most likely outlook for Iraq after the withdrawal of foreign presence, and for Afghanistan after the drawdown of foreign troops. For these countries, it is the dialogue within and between different domestic, political, cultural, sectarian, tribal, and socio-economic groups that is of importance. The countries of the West are also largely at peace with one another now. They finished their wars and resolved their borders in the previous 2 centuries. European nations fought their 2 bloodiest wars in the last. Today, the West is bound tightly together as a mighty and cohesive military force under NATO. Not so the countries and communities of the Muslim and other civilizations. They do not have the solidarity and common purpose enjoyed by the West in many fields. Iran and the Arab states are almost mortal enemies. The longest war in the last century was fought between Iran and Iraq. The Sunni-Shia cleft runs through the spine of virtually every state in West Asia. Syria has problems with many neighbors, like Libya under Gaddafi did. For these countries, next to domestic discourse, intra-civilizational dialogue between them is as urgent as inter-civilizational dialogue with the West, if not more so. It is obvious that dialogue among civilizations has an important role to play in this strategic landscape that is of special meaning to the divide between the Muslim world and the West. Its relevance, though, is confined to the inter-civilizational domain. It does not seek to address the serious problems that exist between communities and countries belonging to the same cultural tradition or civilizational heritage in the Muslim world. Nor does it seek to facilitate or moderate in the internal tensions and disputes that afflict some of these countries. Good dialogues, by their very nature, seek to exchange views, clarify issues and misconceptions, and find common ground. In this regard, dialogues that engage the countries and communities of the West and Muslim world are especially useful, given the extensive ignorance, misperception, misrepresentation, and prejudice that often prevail between the two sides. The misunderstanding is prevalent on both sides, which is odd, given the vast treasury of knowledge available to all in this internet and connected age. The fundamental similarities are overlooked. Instead, it is the presumed differences and the alleged failings of the other that are magnified. Among the distortions in the West are the identification of Islam and Muslims with violence and terrorism, the presumption that Islam is incompatible with democracy, and the confusion of the influence of tradition and culture with religion. groups within the Muslim world share responsibility for this state of affairs, giving Islamic appellations to their militant movements and identifying their cause with religion, committing terrorist acts in the name of Islam against unarmed citizens, more often of their own kind, and undemocratic practices in some countries have all contributed to the negative imaging and understanding in the West. Dialogues can play an important role in correcting this picture. Civilizations know each other and themselves better when they engage. Another area where inter-civilizational dialogue makes an important contribution is in its ability to promote mutual understanding and cooperation. Civilizations that foster cooperative links are less likely to succumb to forces that tend towards conflict with each other. The Alliance of Civilizations is a good example of how forums that begin as dialogues can lead to substantive, collaborative efforts that promote shared knowledge and mutual understanding across cultures. The biennial implementation plans and annual reports of the AOC serve to structure and institutionalize such collaboration. The Barcelona process that aims to promote peace, security, and shared prosperity between the countries of the European Union and the Mediterranean is another initiative that provides sustained and regular collaboration in multiple fields. I have no doubt that this global movement of moderates can make a similarly important contribution. The passion, the dedication, and the commitment that drive it at the highest political level are obvious to all. This will help ensure that it continues to gain traction in the world and in the region. An initiative from Southeast Asia, where great cultures converge and diverse religions flourish alongside each other, has been well worth the wait. These are among the reasons why, in my estimation, inter-civilizational dialogue and movements of the moderates can continue to hold hope in the future. But confidence in civilizational dialogue necessarily comes with certain qualifications. It cannot escape notice that despite nearly 2 decades of initiatives for dialogue, the divide between the Muslim world and the West appears to remain as pronounced as ever. To the extent that dialogues have probably had a positive effect, they appear to have been nullified by other events detrimental to harmonious relations that have intervened. Some of the worst episodes in the relations between the two sides in fact occurred in the last decade. 9/11, the attacks on Afghanistan and Iraq, and the continuing agony in Palestine. In this regard, changes in political leadership leading to changes in policies and strategies seem to have made a greater difference than dialogue, for better or for worse. National interests and domestic constituencies continue to hold primacy. Similarly, facts on the ground, such as the elimination of terrorist leaders and disruption of their organizations on the one hand, and invasions and occupations on the other, also seem to have had a far more concrete impact on attitudes and relations than sustained dialogue. How then can inter-civilizational dialogue make a more effective contribution to peace and security, especially between Muslim nations and those in the West? I would like to share with you my thoughts on this from 3 perspectives. First, the root of the problem. Second, the agenda for dialogue. And third, participation and engagement. the root of the problem, in my opinion, is quite clearly politics. It is issues like terrorism, Palestine, Iraq, and Afghanistan. It is not religion or culture or civilization. Religion, however, has been perverted and exploited by Muslim terrorist groups to serve their political ends. Similarly, political issues have been ethnicized and associated with specific religions and cultures, leading to the emergence of ethnic, religious, and cultural animosities, prejudices, and stereotypes. This situation is fertile ground for exploitation by extremists on all sides, secular as well as religious. That politics is at the heart of the matter is borne out by many studies as well as opinion polls. The high-level group of the Alliance of Civilizations, in its report to the United Nations Secretary General in November 2006, is especially explicit and emphatic on this point. The findings of the report are as pertinent today as they were 5 years ago. Kofi Annan's response on receiving the report was to remark, and I quote, "We should start by reaffirming and demonstrating that the problem is not the Quran, nor the Torah, nor the Bible. Indeed, I have often said the problem is not the faith, it is the faithful and how they behave towards each other." Unquote. To be more effective then, it would be necessary for inter-civilizational dialogues to address the political issues while they do not ignore the other dimensions of the problem. Many dialogues have not been as effective because they deliberately skirt discussion of the key political issues, with the important exception of terrorism. It would be desirable, therefore, for the formal or informal agenda of international dialogues to reflect this need. Different dialogues may understandably be interested in focusing on specific aspects of the problem. Not all of them will want to discuss the political issues, but taken collectively, the dialogues must give the political dimension of the Muslim-West world divide the serious attention it deserves, if there is to be hope for dialogue in the future. It would be more productive too if agenda setting is balanced and addresses the concerns of all sides. Some tilt to accommodate the particular interests of the organizing body is only natural and is to be expected. But a tendency to focus only on the issues and problems posed by the other party, while declining discussion on issues originating from one's own side, would not be helpful. There are quite a number of such forums. The assumption seems to be that you are the problem, not us. Such dialogues are clearly organized to advance the agenda of one side without regard for the reciprocal concerns of the other. It will not be easy to discuss tough political issues. The informal agenda, pursued earnestly in the ante-rooms and in private dinners, will be as important as the formal agenda discussed in the conference hall. Due care and tact will have to be exercised by all sides to prevent dialogues from ending in mutual acrimony and more, not less, ill will. With good stewardship and mature interlocutors, it will be possible to articulate positions and air differences without being unpleasant and disagreeable. This, of course, also demands mutual respect and mutual tolerance, as well as acceptance of the other as an equal. These are fundamental prerequisites for meaningful dialogue. In some instances, when delicate issues are to be on the table, it might also be useful to hold some sessions behind closed doors. Diplomacy, for dialogue can also be another form of diplomacy, often accomplishes much more this way. Not everything needs to be discussed in the glare and blare of publicity. If it is the politics, not culture or religion, which really divides the societies of the Muslim world and the West, then it also follows that participation in these dialogues should reflect this to better effect. Perhaps there is a need to secure greater representation from policymakers, high officials, opinion leaders, and public intellectuals active in the fields of foreign policy and security. The socio-economic dimension of the divide is also not inconsequential. Unless there is better representation from these fields, there can be less than satisfactory engagement on the core issues that really matter. Instead, our attention will be distracted towards discussing issues that are peripheral and that have only marginal impact on narrowing the divide. Conflict and cooperation have marked relations between countries and communities of different ideological, religious, and cultural backgrounds through the ages. In times of conflict, identity becomes a marker to distinguish contending groups. Identity is less of a factor in cooperation. Identity, however, is not the reason why groups clash. It is their interests and ambitions and contests for power and resources that drive groups into conflict. The desire to assert one's will and to secure one's interests by force, and the desire of the other not to succumb or continue in thrall or remain dispossessed, is the story of many a conflict, both between and within civilizations. Values unite rather than divide cultures and religions. Democracy, in particular, is a universal value and a universal yearning. Importantly, there is no contradiction between Islam and democracy to drive Muslim and Western civilizations apart. The democratic systems in Indonesia, Turkey, and Malaysia, and the ongoing movements for greater democracy in the Muslim countries of West Asia and North Africa are empirical testimony, if testimony is at all required. The relations between the countries and communities of the Muslim world and the West are in need of urgent repair. The situation is serious and fragile. Besides the illegal occupation, violence, and antipathies that already exist, all it takes is a terrorist attack in any of the major cities of the West, or a grave slight against one's religion to inflame emotion and aggravate sentiment further. Militant attacks are, of course, almost normal and daily occurrences in Afghanistan and Iraq. Dialogue and mutual collaboration are all the more important in such circumstances. When the situation is grave, it is not the time to abandon hope and sever communication and engagement with the other. Instead, it is time to double efforts and try harder. Process is almost as important as outcome. The alternative would be to be swarmed by the conflictual forces at work. Mobilizing the moderates of the world against the extremists of every country and community across cultures, beliefs, and nationalities can be a potent force for global peace and universal well-being, for it addresses the crux of the matter, the need to discredit and to delegitimize the extremist views and actions that often employ force and violence to achieve their objectives. A movement of the moderates can best do this by advocating moderate values in addressing differences and moderate actions in resolving conflicts. The movement can also help build a stronger culture of peace by promoting greater commitment towards the universal values of mutual respect, compassion, and respect for life, and towards the universal principles of international law, justice, and non-use of force except in defense. I am convinced that the clash of cultures will not occur. At every moment, 1,000 bridges connect us. New ones are being built every day. But I am equally convinced that violence and war across and within nations and communities will remain a sad part of our lives unless we are prepared to grant for the other what we consider right for ourselves. It will then be easier to resolve our differences through peaceful engagement rather than resort to force or violence. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, for taking us through the context, the prospects, and the problems of inter-civilizational dialogue as we try to effect a movement of moderates to ensure that the clash, so-called, of civilizations do not occur. When you said, Your Highness, about the clash of civilizations, I was reminded, or rather more, of the clash of terror that took place in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, where acts of terror obtained as retaliation even greater terror, where Muslims tried to compensate in terms of the greater numbers of lives that they lost with greater horror of their terror. This cycle, if not broken, although the situation seemed to have eased as you outlined, this cycle, if not broken, can happen again at something and someone igniting it. And this is the situation that we must address. And in addressing this civilization, Your Highness, the problems of this potential clash, you outlined what are the ingredients for success in civilizational dialogue. Ingredients about what should be the subject matter, what should be the agenda, and who should participate, and how much there should be mutual respect to ensure that discussions, dialogues result in positive outcomes and not negative and hateful ones. Can I, on behalf of all of you, thank once again Your Royal Highness for giving us so much food for thought and for leading us into wanting to have this movement further. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri Dr. Munir. As a gesture of highest appreciation, I'd like to now call upon Mr. Muhammad Khair Ngadirun to present a memento to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince of Perak. Mr. Muhammad Khair Ngadirun is a member of the Board of Advisors of the International Conference. Mempersilakan Encik Muhammad Khair untuk mempersembahkan sebagai junjungan kasih dari pihak penganjur di atas keberangkatan Duli Yang Teramat Mulia Raja Dr. Nazrin Shah dalam menyampaikan titah seketika tadi. Menjunjung kasih sekali lagi tuanku, dan dengan ini selesailah sudah special royal address untuk kali ini dan mengumumkan keberangkatan pulang Duli Yang Teramat Mulia Raja Dr. Nazrin Shah, announcing the departure of Duli Yang Teramat Mulia Raja Dr. Nazrin Shah leaving the ballroom.